Open your Bibles to the Old Testament. Micah, chapter 5, verse 1. I'll give you a few seconds to find Micah. Most of the time, it's not read. It's not part of devotionals or your reading plans. In some cases, the pages will feel like they're brand new. But we're going to look at it tonight. In the relationship with the last days. The very last of the last days. Micah chapter 5 verse 1 reads, Now gather thyself in troops, O daughter of troops. He hath laid siege against us. They shall smite the judge of Israel with a rod upon the cheek. But thou, Bethlehem Ephrath, though thou be little among thousands of Judah, yet out of thee shall he come forth unto me that is to be ruler in Israel, whose going forth have been from old, from everlasting. That's referring to Jesus. And you can make those connections, which I might, in the New Testament. Therefore he will give them up, verse 3, unto the time that she which travaileth, that's Israel, hath brought forth. Then the remnant of his brethren shall return unto the children of Israel. And he shall stand and feed in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. And they shall abide, for now shall he be great unto the ends of the earth. And this man is added by the translators. It should read, and this shall be the peace, not in this man, and this shall be the peace when the Assyrian shall come into our land. And when he shall threaten our palaces, then shall we raise against him 7 shepherds and 8 principal men, or 8 princes. What is that? When did it happen? Is it still happening? Then we shall raise against him 7 shepherds. Against who? The Assyrian? And of course it sounds like it's a man, but it's not. And I'll tell you why in a few minutes. Against him 7 shepherds and 8 princes. And they shall waste the land of Assyria with the sword, and the land of Nimrod in the entrance thereof. Thus shall he deliver us from the Assyrian when he cometh into our land, and when he treadeth within our borders. Let's just stop there. Now, what does all that mean? When I was years ago doing research on this as a biblical detective, praying and asking God for guidance, I read all sorts of commentaries and material that's been written about these passages. And of course, it's pretty general and it's not too much to explain, except that verse 2 is referring to Jesus. And just about everybody gets that right. But then when you get towards verse 5 and 6, it's all over the place. And then again, a lot of Christian science fiction is brought in. Because that's their go-to. That's the only thing they know. And it becomes believable because enough people preach it or teach it that way. And let me tell you right now, there's very few churches in the world that even preach on this chapter outside of verse 2. So, I did over the years come across a couple pieces that I could read to you, but I'll only read you the parts that I could agree with according to the scriptures, according to biblical and secular history. But then again, I can't continue reading all of it because it gets, unfortunately, back into the Christian science fiction, made-up beliefs that really is nowhere in God's Word to be found. And if anyone that's listened to me in the Last Day series, I've covered enough what the Christian science fiction doctrine is all about. If you're new, I recommend you go to the series and start listening or reading through it. So I'm going to read you two different sources, and then I'll start inputting, stop where I cannot agree at all with what they're saying, and then if I have time, take over what I believe, using history and the Bible in understanding what verse 5 and 6 is referring to, especially verse 5. Then shall we raise against him 7 shepherds and 8 principal men. Before I even do that, put up the map. That map, you can see the outline there and red lines and red dotted lines, the different extensions of power and how far it reached when the Assyrian Empire ruled that part of the world. Here's another one of my pet peeves, is maps. It is so hard to find. It drives me crazy. It is so hard to find updated maps. Now, what you see there, for the most part, some don't even include that much. What the Assyrian Empire looked like at its greatest extension of its empire. At least that's what you assume. Now, with all the history we have now, and some still being discovered, how vast, the empire was, those lines are not a true description of the area it controlled and ruled. And why am I saying that? For example, you see, obviously, Israel. If you would put a modern day map of that area, it would include Lebanon, it would include Syria, it would include eastern Turkey, it would include all of Iraq, and it would include about half of Iran, which this map almost does. But there's a problem. You see that curve at the bottom? That's in Saudi Arabia's territory. With the history that we now have, and the proof that we now have, that bottom line would extend almost to the central part of Saudi Arabia. So you have to include at least the northern section, at the minimum, of present-day Saudi Arabia in that map. But it's hard to find those kind of maps. It's like they made these maps 30, 50 years ago and nobody's decided to ever change and update the maps as more and more information became available. That's one of my pet peeves. What this verse in verse 5 is referring to, and also in verse 6, is not a man. That's added by the translators. It's emphasizing an empire. Remember, when Micah got the word from the Lord, and contemporary of Isaiah, who was ruling the empire at that time, especially during Micah's period? The Assyrian Empire. It was true back then, and now fast forward to this prophecy of verse 5 and 6, it's referring to not just Syria, and that's the problem I have with a few of the people I'm going to read to you what they have to say. They don't get it because they're still looking for an Antichrist, a man that would come from Syria when they read these verses. Syria, the present day Syria, the one that has Damascus and Aleppo in it, that Syria. That's the problem. No. What we read here and what these 7 shepherds and 8 princes will come against is nations that used to comprise the Assyrian Empire thousands of years ago. So what are those nations? I just went through those nations with you. I repeat, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Turkey, parts of Islam, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia. Most of those, by the way, you would include in the Psalm 83 war. But now you come back to me. Let's continue. Micah the prophet wrote about 7 shepherds over Israel in the very last days. The last shepherd is the second coming of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, who comes in full glory to defend Israel. The last shepherd, or 7 shepherds. So this writer is saying the 7th shepherd will be Jesus Christ. Okay. I don't have an argument with that. And what do they fulfill? Who are these 7 shepherds, or what do they fulfill in prophecy? 3 have already come to pass, and the 4th is right now in office. Well, I'm telling you right now because it's a little dated. That particular person has already come and gone too. In chapter 5 of Micah, he predicts that the Jewish people would reject Messiah and hand him over to the Romans. This part of Micah is referenced in Matthew 27:30 and Mark 15:19. You can write those verses down and read them yourself when you review this. This part of Micah is referenced in Matthew 27:30 and Mark 15:19. This was fulfilled with the crucifixion of Messiah on the cross. For years, people believed that Christ was crucified on April 3rd, 33 AD, because the heavenly signs point to that date. But when using the Hebrew calendar, God's design calendar, and the formula given to Daniel the prophet, it adds up to the Passover of 32 AD. And that's not the subject tonight, so I'm not going to get into that. Both years, 32 and 33 AD, were marked by blood moons and eclipses of the sun exactly as they are this very year and the next year on the first and last feast days. which by nothing significant happened in the time period this person wrote that. According to Daniel, Messiah had to be cut off, killed, before the second temple was utterly destroyed. And only Jesus Christ of Nazareth fits that description. It was then predicted that the second temple would be destroyed because of the Jewish rejection of Messiah. Even today, not all Jews realize the second temple was destroyed for this very reason. The fulfillment of Micah 5:1 was recorded in Mark 15 and Matthew 2, verses 4 through 6. Also speaks of our true Messiah coming from Bethlehem, which is quoted if you read Micah chapter 5, verse 2, which we already did. Micah predicted the dispersion of Israel and regathering, which we have seen. That started in 1948, when Israel became a nation once again. That's what verses 3 and 5 is telling us, without all the details. But now we know the details, we would have that as history. To understand more of the prophecies we are witnessing and are very soon to witness, we need to know what the current day names are for the ancient lands mentioned in prophecy. Part of that key is to examine actual history which has fulfilled prophecy to the letter. I have no problem with that either. Balaam was a corrupt prophet. He intended to sell out Israel to her enemies. But God took over his voice and denied him the words he intended to speak out, cursing Israel. This is Balaam's error. When we read of churches or people committing Balaam's error in prophecy of last day churches, or even the first century church, we know they're speaking evil and error over God's people in land called Israel. There is no room for anti-Semitism in any church or on the lips of any person who calls himself Christian. By the way, I've mentioned it before, I think that was Martin Luther's flaw. But that's another subject altogether. Balaam was forced by God to speak truth. In his last oracle, he was not a Jewish prophet, but a Gentile seer, recorded in Numbers 24:24. Balaam prophesied that Rome used to be known by the name Kittim, Kittim, would destroy Assyria or Ashur, and then Eber. Eber was the ancient name for Israel. Eber was an ancestor of Abraham, and this is the source of the word Hebrew. Ashur was one of the sons of Shem who founded the Assyrians. All these exchanges of land and their renaming have come to pass. Assyria was a larger area than Syria is today. Isaiah 7:14 and 16 prophesied Assyria's destruction that would occur before Messiah would reach his time of bar mitzvah. The whole of Assyria was turned to waste during the Roman-Parthian wars that occurred 60 to 20 BCE. When the war was finally over, after 40 years of fighting, Assyria was divided into half, with one half going to Rome and the other half going to Parthia. While the whole of Assyria was a ruinous heap, the city of Damascus, located on the half renamed Syria, was never totally destroyed. Damascus is perhaps the oldest and most ancient city to exist upon the earth today. It prophesied utter destruction will be something to look for in the future as we see more prophecy unfold in our lifetime. When the prophecies concerning the conquering of Assyria, the land of Ashur, met its perfect fulfillment and renamed Syria, it then was ruled over by the Greeks. History shows this to be true. What did Balaam speak? But, quote, "But ships shall come from the coast of Kittim," which is Rome, "and they shall afflict Ashur," which is Assyria, "and will afflict Eber," which is Israel. So they will also come to destruction. You can read it in Numbers 24. The seven shepherd prophets of Micah speaks of what already has occurred and what very soon will occur politically and militarily in Israel, between Israel and the current day Syria. Now, the only correction I would make there is, in reference to this prophecy, is just not Syria alone. you have to include other nations, possibly, that were part of the Assyrian Empire. The prophecies of the shepherds in Micah spans the time of the rebirth of Israel as a nation, 1948, right up to the second coming when Christ steps onto the planet with us and the planet with us and the angels to save Israel from the Antichrist. Now, there's where I disagree, and you know the reasons why, who have listened to me and studied along with me in the Last Day series. Micah describes 8 political leaders and 7 shepherds. And he wonderfully describes Messiah as one born in Bethlehem, who is our peace. When he destroys the final Assyrian and sets up a kingdom that will extend to the ends of the earth, the following is the scriptures of Micah. Well, that's where we started, so I'm not going to read those verses again. The princely men are actual leaders called prime ministers. Let's write that down. Go to the screen. Because he's actually right in this case. The princes equal, let's just put prime ministers. Now, the first 4 of these leaders was, let's write this down, David, Ben-Gurion, which I agree with, who was really not elected as a prime minister. There was no time to organize anything much at all as far as government. On the very day the UN declared Israel into existence, Israel was attacked by all surrounding Muslim nations on all sides. Syria attacked from the north. David Ben-Gurion was also the first shepherd as he performed a dual role as defense minister. Okay, let's put it down here. These are the princes. These are going to be the shepherds. So, now we have identified the first prince and shepherd of this prophecy. David Ben-Gurion was also the first shepherd as he performed a dual role as defense minister. So shepherds, which I agree with, by the way, are defense ministers, which we'll get a little bit more into that maybe today, maybe the next time. He ordered Israel to push Syrian troops back into Syria. On July 20th, 1949, Israel and Syria signed the Israel-Syria Armistice Agreement. Syria withdrew most of its troops from the Golan Heights, and it was dubbed the Demilitarized Zone. Israel occupied its borders. The second leader was Levi Eskol, who was the prime minister in 1967. Levi Eskol. I have no problem with that either. He was the prime minister in 1967 when God's capital city, Jerusalem, came back into Israel's possession during the Six-Day War. Once again, Syria attacked from the north and Egypt attacked from the south. Israel gained full control over the Golan Heights and used it as a buffer zone between between herself and Syria. People who hate Jews from the Golan Heights area are able to easily shoot Israeli citizens down below. This has always been a common practice of Muslims occupying that area. Israel feels the need to protect its citizens. So, Moshe Dayan, at that time, when that war took place, was the second shepherd. So we have two princes, prime ministers and 2 defense ministers. He was the second shepherd, fighting for Israel against Syria. I'm going to change it to Assyrians. Assyrians, not just Syria. Parts of the Golan Heights was given over to Syria just prior to the next war. The third prince was actually a wonderful, gutsy woman named Golda Meir. Let's write that down. Golda Meir, who in seeing her country totally surrounded on all sides by an enemy whose sole purpose was complete and utter genocide of the entire Jewish population, in the act of desperation called President Nixon in the middle of the night on a weekend and said, if you don't help us, we won't exist by Monday. This is the Independence War. Let me just put it this way. This is the Independence War. So the 1967 war. Then you had the 1973 war with the Assyrians. Now, if you don't help us, we won't exist by Monday. That's what she said to President Nixon. Henry Kissinger, believe it or not, a German Jew, knew of Israel's plight at the close of Congress that week and simply said, quote, so let them bleed, end of quote. Nixon's mother was a devout praying Christian who prophesied over her own son as a child that he would grow up to be the President of the United States and he would save the Jews. This was before Israel was even a nation. Nixon could not send troops because this would take an act of Congress and Congress would not reconvene until Monday. So what did Nixon do? What Nixon did do was send lots and lots of equipment to Israel at once without delay in a massive deployment of tanks and etc. Within days, tiny Israel the size of New Jersey had all her enemies, which was equivalent to China attacking New Jersey, pushed back so far that they were almost to the capital cities of Egypt and Syria. Kissinger had to tell Israel to stop or they would be creating World War III. And so Israel, against insurmountable odds and against a large, powerful adversaries, won this war. The war stories of miracles still abound. This one's kind of neat, to tell you the truth. The enemy saw massively large numbers of parachuting troopers dressed in white descending upon their battlefields. Just think about that. They saw a massively large number of parachuting troops dressed in white descending upon their battlefields. Israel didn't have such a large parachuting division. And if they did, they most certainly would not have dressed in white. Michael the archangel who protects Israel had fun with this one. The miracle stories always abound in Israel's favor. Enemy tanks were deserted, left running by the terrified fleeing enemy. All the Israeli soldiers had to do was jump in and attack the enemy with their own tanks. Throughout the Bible, we have read such stories of God being with Israel and helping them vanquish their foes. He's still the same God who loves Israel and is still doing those very same things today. Malachi 3:8 tells us a quote directly from God. Quote, I am God, I do not change, end of quote. Nixon was no more corrupt than any other leaders in office have been. Watergate and the call for his impeachment came about solely for the reason he helped out Israel in the time of need, which I agree with, by the way. Nixon was set up and then crucified in the media to gain popular bias. From time to time, we do have leaders in the U.S. who do what is right because it's the right thing to do, even if they are also corrupt in other ways. Nixon was one of them, but he also paid the price for his corruption too. He was publicly humiliated. Moshe Dayan was also the defense minister during Golda Meir's leadership as well as during Levi Eshkol's leadership. Okay, so now we have Amoshi, whatever you pronounce his name. I've heard different ways of saying that, and I'm still confused how to really say his name, but nevertheless, Moshe, first name, Dayon, second name. So, we have 3 princes and 2, excuse me. We have 3 princes and 2 shepherds, 3 prime ministers, and 2 defense ministers up to this point. You got it? Why? Moshe Dayan was also the defense minister during Golda Meir's leadership as well as during Levi Eshkol's leadership. So, 1 defense minister under 2 prime ministers. And what did I say? Well, no, what did the scriptures say? We have 8 prime ministers and only 7 shepherds. You can see now why there's only 7 at this point. Because under 2 different prime ministers, there's only 1 shepherd. Only one shepherd. And this shepherd would be the reason why we have 8 leaders and 7 shepherds in this prophecy. December 14th, 1981, Israel ratified the Golan Heights Law. This applied Israeli law to the Golan Heights area controlled by Israel. The 3rd shepherd, Ariel Sharon, okay, these two go together. Now the 3rd shepherd would be Ariel. I'm running out of room here, so I'll try to write smaller. Sharon. The 3rd defense minister now comes in the scene. Now we're in the time period of 1981. 1981. What was 1981? 1981, we had the first, 82, 81, or 82, the first Lebanese war. The first Lebanese war. So, let me put this here and get ready to write that down. Hang on. The 3rd shepherd, Ariel Sharon, was ordered by the 4th leader, Menachem Begin. Okay, let's write the 4th leader down. The 4th prime minister, Menachem Begin. Let's just put him in 1981 time period. All right, where was I here? The 3rd shepherd, Ariel Sharon, was ordered by the 4th leader, Menachem Begin, to annex all of the Golan and to start Jewish settlements in the area. It is imperative for the safety of Israeli citizens in other areas of Israel to have control over this high ground area. Only a very small amount of land was returned to Syria. Another section of the Golan land was added to the land Israel already possessed. The very next year, Israel fought the Lebanese War. 1981. I'll write it down here. Let's just write Lebanon. Lebanon War. In 1981, Israel bombed a nuclear facility in Iraq also. In 1982, Israel led a full-scale invasion of Lebanon. Syria entered the war in support of Lebanon. About 80 Syrian MiGs and 19 missile batteries were utterly destroyed by Israel in the Bekaa Valley, and Israel did not suffer one single plane lost. At the end of June, Israel captured most of the southern Lebanon and did sieges against the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, and Syrian force in western Beirut. Syria stopped occupying Lebanon in 2005. So that brings us down now to the last three shepherds or defense ministers before Christ returns. That's enough of that source. Let's move on. And I'll try to read through this quickly to get all this in tonight. Another source. The prophet Micah recorded an incredible prophecy about 7 shepherds in the last days. In chapter 5, he begins predicting the Messiah will be rejected by the Jewish people and handed over to the Romans. This part of prophecy fulfilled in AD 32 is a reference in Matthew 27 and Mark 15:19. Pretty much the same thing that I read earlier. In reaction to the Jewish leaders rejecting the Messiah and handing him over to the Romans, God handed Jerusalem over to the Romans to be sieged and destroyed. And this was fulfilled in AD 70. Micah 5:1 reads, "Now muster yourself in troops, daughter of troops. They have laid siege against us. With a rod they will smite the judge of Israel on the cheek." Mark 15:19, "They kept beating his head with a reed and spitting on him and kneeling and bowing before him." Bethlehem would be spared Roman besiegement and destruction because the Messiah, the Eternal One, was born there. Jesus Christ fulfilled part of this prophecy when he was born in, it says 2 BC, which I don't agree with. This part of prophecy is quoted in Matthew 2, verses 4 through 6. Yes, I read through that fast, but Bethlehem was spared by the Romans, by the way, when they conquered that area. I don't think that's ironic, by the way. God has his hand in history. Let's jump along because I'm going to run out of time. God allowed the Romans to dissolve the nation of Israel and disperse the Jewish people throughout the rest of the world. At the appointed time, God planned for the Jewish people to return and reestablish the nation of Israel. This was fulfilled in AD 1948 when Israel was reestablished as a nation. Sometime after this, the Messiah will return and set up his millennial reign that will extend to the ends of the earth. Let's move along. The 7 shepherds. What does this writer have to say? Well, he agrees with the first 4 shepherds, which we already covered with that other source. One of the main keys to understanding end-time prophecy is understanding the 7 shepherds' prophecy in Micah 5 through 8. The time period from the rebirth of Israel in 1948 to the second coming of the Messiah will be the time of the 7 shepherds. Micah describes the Messiah as the one born in Bethlehem and the one who will be our peace when he destroys the final Assyrian and sets up a kingdom that will extend to the ends of the earth. Micah's prophecy refers to the Prince of Peace destroying the Antichrist. Once again, I don't agree with that. You know the reasons why. At the second coming. According to the prophet Micah, between 1948 and the second coming, there will be 8 leaders and 7 shepherds over Israel. And once again, you can read that in verses 5 through 6. In Israel, the position of principal leader is called prime minister. And the one who shepherds with the sword is called defense minister. The key to identifying the leaders and shepherds is that they must be the prime minister and defense minister at the time when Israel enters a war with Syria, an occupied territory that's considered Syrian land at the time of the war. Not true. And the reason I told you, because I started with that map. It's identifying Israel entering into a war with the nation that's inside that Assyrian empire map that I showed you. Not just Syria as we know it today. And that's the mistake these people make. Because they don't want to recognize a mistranslation in the verses, especially the King James and other translations also, when they included man in that verse, in verse excuse me, verse 5. And this man shall be the peace when the Assyrians shall come into our land. It's Assyrian. And the man is not Antichrist. I'm sorry, he's just not. Now, let's get beyond that. This area between Israel and Syria, or the Assyrian Empire, was called Bashan in ancient times. But because they're just referring to Syria in this case, it was the Bashan in ancient times, that little area that's now part of the control of Israel. But today it's called the Golan Heights. It was part of Israel over 2,000 years ago, was not given back to Israel in 1948. So Syria controlled the area until the War of Independence. Now let's go through the wars real quick. War of Independence, 1948, the first shepherd and the first leader, which we already covered. In 1948, the very day the UN declared Israel to be a sovereign state, the Muslim nations surrounding her attacked. Syria attacked from the north. David Ben-Gurion ordered Israeli troops to push Syria back into Syrian territory. Since Israel began as a brand new state, it had no prime minister yet, but David Ben-Gurion acted as defense minister. Shortly after the war, he was elected Israel's first prime minister. David Ben-Gurion functioned as both prime minister and defense minister in the War of Independence. He was the first leader and the first shepherd. On July 20th, 1949, Israel and Syria signed the Israel-Syrian Armistice Agreement. Syria withdrew its forces from most of the Golan Heights, which became a demilitarization zone. Israel occupied its border. And then you move on to the Six-Day War, which we already covered in 1967. This is when the second shepherd comes in and the second leader. I'm not going to read you all the details, but we already covered it. Then Yom Kippur War, the war in 1973, is when the second shepherd still in existence, but now you have the third leader, Golda Meir. You move on to the 1981 war, is where the third shepherd, which was Ariel Sharon, and the prime minister, Menachem Begin, comes in. Now, in 1981, Israel bombed an Iraqi nuclear facility. In 1982, Israel led a full-scale invasion of Lebanon. Syria entered a war in support of Lebanon. Still, nearly 80 Syrian MiGs and 19 missile batteries in Bekaa Valley were destroyed. We already covered that. These events then would be all counted under the fourth leader and third shepherd. Syria stopped occupying Lebanon in 2005. Yes, they did. Now, here's the problem. All these writers and all these preachers, they don't know what to do, and I'm out of room here, for the fourth, fifth, and sixth shepherd. They just don't know what to do with it. What about the fifth, sixth, and seventh leaders? Now we have a seventh shepherd too. Now, they all put Jesus Christ as the seventh shepherd and the seventh prince. which I have no problem, because I agree with that too. Now, here comes the problem. I had something here that I wrote down there. Where's my... Hang on, folks. I thought I brought it with me, but I didn't. I wrote some notes on a 3x5 card. And that 3x5 card is gone. So be it. I don't need it. Here's the problem. There was, we know, in 2006, the Second Lebanese War. And the reason, check, oh, here it is, I found it. The Second Lebanese War, they don't count it, even though it's part of the Assyrian Empire, but they don't recognize it as the Assyrian Empire, what Micah's referring to. They only want to recognize it as Syria itself. And even though Syria was indirectly involved in the Second Lebanese War, they didn't want to count it. And who was prime minister? Who was the prince in 2006 Lebanon War? That's just right there. Ehud Olmert, or Olmert. Who was the prime minister? Amir Peretz. Now, is anybody going to lose their salvation over this? No. Should we count it? So let's just put the question mark right there. Should we count the fifth prince and the fourth shepherd in this list? Should we place it in this list? Should they be added to this list? Because this 2006 Lebanese War was within the Assyrian Empire geographical placement. Put it up on the map again, if you can. Should it be counted? Then you might ask, what about the Gaza War? They fall into that map area. I don't even really know if I could count Gaza as that war as a war. It was labeled that, but I'm not even sure that was a war, to tell you the truth. My personal opinion, it really wasn't. But that happened in 2008. Then you had some upheaval in 2012, and the list goes on and on. But we know Jesus Christ is the seventh. And he's the eighth. I don't have room here to write it down. He's not the seventh prince. I mean, he's the seventh prince, not the eighth prince. Excuse me. I mean, he's the eighth prince and not the seventh shepherd. I got that backwards here. Jesus Christ is the eighth prince. Jesus Christ is also going to be the seventh shepherd, defense minister. How do you like Jesus as your defense minister? What an awesome defense minister. What an awesome prince. But the question is, the fifth, sixth, and seventh, let's just call it leader, or prince, and the fourth, fifth, and sixth. Now we added Ehud Olmert and Amir Peretz in for the fifth and fourth on the list. So what's going to happen if the Lebanese War of 2006 should be included, because they were part of the Assyrian Empire of old that's still coming against Israel? And where do you think Lebanon gets a lot of their backing from in 2006, even still today? Syria. and also Iran. And Iran is part of that map. Now, should Iran be counted in this list somewhere if they attack Israel? Now, we know we have two wars still out there. Psalm 83 war and Gog-Magog war. Now, they're going to have to squeeze into this list somewhere. Right now, Netanyahu is one of the prime ministers. But he's not in a war. Yes, he's in a struggle, but he's not in a war with any of these enemies. That's part of this Assyrian Empire map. So, what are we going to do? We're going to wait and we're going to see. We're going to wait and we're going to see. I believe, and this is where I take a step further than any of these writers and people that preach on this subject, than they do. Because I do believe, and you know the reasons why, that there's going to be a Psalm 83 war and there's going to be a Gog and Magog war. And if I'm correct, and it's still a question mark, then 2006 has to be included in this Lebanese war. If I'm not, then there's still 3 wars left. Now, I also want to include in here, somewhere in 5th, 6th, and 7th prime minister, you have to bring Iran into the picture. So I can easily eliminate the 2006 war. But if I'm going to do that, then I have to include Psalm 83, the Gog-Magog war, and somewhere in that group, the Iran conflict that will come, if it comes. If Iran and Israel do not have a conflict, now we know we're going to be part of the Gog and Magog war, but I'm talking about a conflict where Iran is pretty much the principal that's going after Israel as its enemies. So there's all kinds of possibilities here is what I'm saying. Not many, but there's some. One of these slots will be filled in with the Psalm 83 war. One of these slots is going to be filled in with Gog and Magog war. Now we possibly filled in slot number 5 and 4. But that could change. That could change. I don't think so, but it can change. And if it's going to change, it's because a possible future conflict with Iran. Now, will Iran take the lead in a war with Israel? We'll see. We know they hang on to coattails eventually with a war with Turkey. They'll be part of that coalition in the Gog-Magog war. But the only reason I'm pointing this all out, you already can see half of this prophecy already fulfilled. The remainder of it will happen rapidly because time is ticking. So when you see these wars play out, you will know, because people keep asking me, and this is the reason I'm doing this tonight, you will know how close the Lord's return is. When you see these slots filled in, and you can make your own chart, mine is messy. You can make your own chart. When you see these slots being filled in, you can say to yourself, "Oh Lord, you're one day closer." And that's why some people get aggravated at me when the Lord's coming back this year. Or the Lord's going to come back 2024. No, he's not. I'm sorry to burst your bubble. Unless I am drastically wrong, all these slots are not going to be filled in within the next year and 3 months. And these slots have to be filled in before the final shepherd and the final Prince of Peace comes again at his second coming. Now, I know I threw a lot at you. Review it when it gets on the archives, and I'll come back to this in the future to fill in more gaps. But now you have an idea. So quit asking me, is the Lord returning this year? Have you seen these things fulfilled? If you haven't, and let me tell you, as they become our way, I'll fill in the slots and I'll let you know. I still question, it's possible, the fifth and fourth slot is already filled in. That could change. But this I know for sure. 2 slots are reserved for the Psalm 83 and Gog-Magog war. And the Psalm 83 war might not be one big war at once. It might be broken up in different periods of time. Not like years apart, but it's a possibility. So that's where we are. So is the Lord returning tomorrow? Nope. Is he returning next September? Nope. Listen, if I'm wrong, hallelujah. I wish we returned tonight. This body needs a new body. But it's not happening, folks. Learn to read the signs of the times. And this is not yet the season of his return. There's still things that need to be completed. And this list of princes and shepherds has some fill-in spots. It has some names still missing. But it's coming. And it's coming soon. Now I want to hear from you.